Well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today, I'm beginning a new mini theme in my videos. It's going to be one of those three film arcs that I seem to have fallen into the habit of doing over the last couple of weeks, whilst things are a bit more loose and flexible. I thought I would go back and take a look at a filmmaker who I think is sort of almost a lost auteur. Who I mean, of course, his style has influenced filmmaking over the last 20 years, don't get me wrong. But, I don't know, there's something about him that's sort of been forgotten. I mean, partly because his films are made seldom and released sporadically, and so it's very easy for people to forget Baz Luhrmann. Now, I would happily say that Baz Luhrmann that is a filmmaker who brings a unique voice to his style, and of course, to some degree, all filmmakers bring a unique voice, but when you when you watch a Baz Luhrmann film, and there isn't anything like it in terms of the balance of serious storytelling and the strict discipline of performance in not just the actors but in the actual visuals, but also the fact that it's conversely incredibly zany and manic. And you think, well, these things can't be compatible. It can't be disciplined and manic at the same time. And yet, Baz Luhrmann manages to find the artistry in finding the manic within the disciplined. So, as part of this arc, I was going to watch the Red Curtain Trilogy. Of course, the three films that I suppose really put him on the map and showed him from an independent filmmaker developing into the big Hollywood feature filmmaker that he, of course, became. Starting with, of course, Strictly Ballroom. It's interesting because this whole film series has demonstrated my interest in examining filmmakers' early work and the defining characteristics that exist even in their first features. And the fact that for a lot of these filmmakers it becomes like a calling card, a demonstration of what they seek to do. Of course, for the filmmakers who started in independent film, like Baz Luhrmann, and then went on to Hollywood fame, independent filmmaking gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom to be able to tell the stories you want and use the styles you want, and with no real restrictions. Of course, the only restriction being money and the fact that it's going to be low budget and it's not going to have the power of a big Hollywood feature, but as I say, it also doesn't have the restrictions and external pressures. And so when you look at Strictly Ballroom, you can see everything Baz Luhrmann wants to do and demonstrate, everything that exists across his filmography, through Moulin Rouge up to Great Gatsby. You can see the fact that he, of course, comes from a theatrical background, the Red Curtain Trilogy being structured around theatre and the theatre of filmmaking and the different ways in which the different relationships we have with theatre. So, of course, in Strictly Ballroom, it is the dance movie with Romeo and Juliet. It's the Shakespeare adaptation with Moulin Rouge. It's the big musical. But on top of that, you also see other hallmarks of his style. You see the theatrical structuring. It's not just the fact that he's making something that has a relationship to theatre and the theatric style, but he wants to experiment with how our relationship between film and other mediums, I suppose the root of that, and the relationships between them, and how we can relate to certain film styles through a history and a legacy of how, before film there was of course stage, dance, musicals, Shakespeare, and they, say what you will about how cinema has elevated storytelling beyond the stage, but at its heart, it comes from this. And then there's also the comedy of Baz Luhrmann. Now, admittedly, this is something I will confess at this point, I haven't seen Romeo and Juliet. When we get to that will be my first viewing of this. Moulin Rouge I love and I have seen many times. But I think between this and Moulin Rouge, what's very apparent is that Baz Luhrmann never wants to examine films from a straight perspective. He wants to inject comedy and mania. He wants to have a tongue-in-cheek relationship with the meaning behind his film. So, I mean, Strictly Ballroom is probably the most comedic film of his that I've seen. It's verging on parody. However, when you discuss parody, people immediately draw to things like Airplane or the Scary Movie films, where it's a comedy that uses the hallmarks of a certain genre to poke fun at itself, or to service the genre for comedic effect. So, Airplane is of course parodying the disaster film. And on some level that is what he's doing. He wants to have this satirical examination of dance culture and the dance communities that he grew up in, and the intense relationships that people have with dance competitions and the environments that that young people who have these dance parents come from. And the fact that you open the film with that documentary style talking heads, the fact that our lead Scott essentially sacrifices his chances of winning the competition because he's breaking from convention, but that's intercut with his parents, his coach, reacting to it, to talking about it as if it was something that happened in a documentary from years ago, when the way it's structured, it's happening in present time. It's the documentary is almost like a strange meta text. And again, Baz Luhrmann loves metatext. He loves using it to examine the film that we're in. This is really a case of him wanting to poke fun at the culture of dance, and yet the difference between this and, say, the comedies I've mentioned, like Airplane, like Naked Gun, like Scary Movie, is the fact that it's not there to simply poke fun at the genre, at the dance genre. It takes the dance genre very seriously. The performances, the dances, he treats them with the experience of someone who's come from a dance background and wants to demonstrate the skill and ability of excellent dancers. He's simply using that to be able to examine the tropes of the dance film. So, this film, in terms of its structure, follows a very traditional, kind of story, where it is about a shamed or broken dancer who has to find himself through a newbie, and there's pressures from on him because of the expectations of his excellence, and there's the pressures on her from a community, and it plays into stereotypes of dance films and other genre pieces of this kind. And yet, that's not really the important bit. The important bit is between the plot beats. It's the eccentricities that Baz Luhrmann wants to inject. It's the way that he uses the camera to create this intense mania. I mean, this is something that will continue through Baz Luhrmann's work, where he almost doesn't like the camera to stop. He wants this constant frenetic sense of movement. So it's constantly cutting to close-ups of people's faces, or tracking as someone dances, or cuts between moving feet to people moving around to someone who might stand still, but there's so much energy in their expression and their performance. He doesn't want to have, I suppose, points of stillness. And don't get me wrong, this film does have, slower moments of, say, romance between our two leads. But even then, it's through dance and it's through movement. And, and this will be exemplified even further when we get to Moulin Rouge. That sense of constant, frenetic movement, and everything has to be happening at once. We're not allowed time to take breath and time to sort of reflect. It's on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And that's very much in his style. And again, it fits into the love of movement and dance that Baz Luhrmann has. That sense that he wants to almost make the camera as much a character in the film as the characters we're watching. And don't get me wrong, there are things that bad habits that he will continue that you could also see in this film, particularly the third act. I think third acts are something that Baz Luhrmann really struggles with, because Baz Luhrmann loves crescendos. He loves building and building and building to this huge epic climax, but I don't think he's that interested in endings. I don't think he's that interested in tying up plot beats or, coming to a conclusion. On some level, he wants it to build into a big, almost musical theatre style crescendo and then just stop. You definitely get that in this. You definitely get that in Moulin Rouge. You even definitely get that in Great Gatsby, which is quite odd considering that Great Gatsby has a definitive ending, but he likes that sense of sort of explosion of performance and events and everything coming together in one big clashing of story and character and performance and everything. But it means you don't get resolution in a traditional way. You don't get that sense of, okay, so this is the end of this character and this is the... You get it to some degree, and some characters definitely get conclusions, but it's not tidy, it's not clear, it's very much in the school of Bugsy Malone, where essentially Baz Luhrmann wants it to end with everyone in chaos, everything's coming together, but it ultimately is all a pie fight at the end. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a unique aspect. It's another unique aspect that you would attribute to him, but it does mean from a more strict conventional plot points perspective, it is frustrating when there are certain characters you're like, well, I wanted a resolution with that, or what happens to this person? It doesn't give you that. You have to infer it. And it is a fun film. It is, like I say, if you love dance. Now, dance films like musicals aren't necessarily my bread and butter, but I appreciate them, and I'm learning more and more about them. I mean, my whole musicals series is about me developing my taste for what kinds of musicals and what I like within musicals. And I definitely relate dance films to that in that respect. And so this is fun and has, like I say, the energy. And it just because it's a bit rougher, and it is, as I say, an independent and early film. It's not got any huge stars at the time. You know, it's very... The people he can get together, you know, it has a real Australian authenticity to it. It's not like... This, I suppose, would be his last time that he makes a film where it's primarily an Australian cast. You know, he then goes on to obviously want to have the Hollywood sheen. This is much more... much more based in his hometown, as it were, much more his experience. And there's something almost autobiographical about it in that respect, because, as I say, the dancing, the theatrical style, the Australianness of it, it all definitely feels like Baz Luhrmann is trying to relate a metatextual examination of himself and where he comes from. And I'm curious as we go forward into the Red Curtain trilogy, whether I'll start to see Baz Luhrmann as a person and his self-reflexiveness in his later in the subsequent films. But you know what, like I say, this is an interesting document to see where he's come from and to see his style develop. I mean, he's very parallel to, say, Peter Jackson, where, of course, Peter Jackson came from a horror background and he loved his zombie films. And, of course, that he went completely off into things like The Lord of the Rings and King Kong and The Lovely Bones. And yet, I imagine if you were to go back to any of his first couple of films, you would definitely see the same hallmarks that define Peter Jackson in those films. And I do wonder, again, I am curious as I've gone through this. I mean, between my own experiences outside this series and a couple of the films that I've watched within it, the Australian filmmaking culture is one that interests me, and the voice within it is different from Hollywood and different from British independent. It's, you know, it is one that I am intrigued to return to. But yeah, I'm glad. I am looking forward to seeing his sequels because, well, one, I've never seen, even though, of course, it's based on a classic text, which I have read many times. And one is we'll get to my feelings on Moulin Rouge. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because it's all helped me in the algorithm. Check out my back catalogue of videos, and subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about films and TV shows, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Take care.